and good evening. Welcome to Everything Homeschooling. And today we're going to be talking about deschooling, which is known by other names as well as what happens when you transition, when you take your kids out of school and begin homeschooling or free learning, as we like to call it. So, hope you'll stay with us, get yourself comfortable. Take a deep breath, relax a minute, and we'll be right back with you. Please stay with us. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Gail Hanlon, your host here for Everything Homeschooling. So, today we're going to be talking about a word that many of you probably have heard and a concept that you may be struggling with. If you've recently or within the last couple of years started home educating, you may have missed or tried it and not really been able to navigate the deschooling process. So I want to direct you to a couple of really, really awesome resources. And I'm going to show you them on here. So, first, though, let me define what we're talking about. So we're talking about if your children have been in the education system and you have taken them out and you are starting your own course or your own way of helping your children learn. So that transition can be very challenging. And there's a number of reasons why. Oh, remind me in 1 hour. Okay, life happens. Okay, so where was I? There I was. All right. So deschooling, it's pretty much what it sounds like. We might be more familiar with something like deprogramming or deconditioning. Because if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll understand about how the system of the education system that we've had for the last 150 to 200 years has really been about classical conditioning. And there's a whole course that I do on the history of education. But our education system was designed to nationalize and socialize our population, because the population at the time, if you think back and, jump into your time traveling suits and boxes and go back 150 years or so, it was a very different scenario that we were looking at. People from very many different places coming here to the New World, Acadia, and they didn't all speak English. They didn't have the same backgrounds, traditions. We do have a lot of that now, but what we've done in the last 150 years has changed to make the majority of people think and act alike. Because there are 4 basic things that the school system did to try and basically nationalize and socialize the people in the school system. And they wanted to start young because it was the best way to influence people. Now, in a wonderful book called The School Promoters, you will find that Alison Prentice, the author, did a lot of research at the University of Toronto, going through all the correspondence that Egerton Ryerson had with his counterparts. And in there you will find quotes like, the children had to be removed from the inappropriate influences of their family and their parents. That schools were cheaper to build than prisons. And that a form of how they realized success in the early government schools were to rid them of their Irish brogue. If you didn't speak the King's English, you were considered illiterate. Seriously. Even if you were highly trained in your former country, that book, Lena, is called The School Promoters by Alison Prentice. I believe she still teaches in BC in Victoria University. But that book was published in 1977. So The School Promoters is what you're looking for. And that really tells us a lot about what the motives were for the education system. They weren't for what most of us think they should have been. And so knowing that history helps us understand a lot about how it's so challenging to transition today from the conventional industrial school system. And thanks for asking that question, Lena. That was great. There you are. I can bring you up on the screen here. I have this wonderful platform that I'm going to be learning how to use a lot better. And so that being said, knowing the history is super important. So if you can understand that when you've been conditioned or used to a certain way, it does take time to adapt. Change is different. It may be awkward or uncomfortable. But here's a couple of things that we can recognize as how we were conditioned. So ideas and concepts were separated into subjects. So for instance, instead of, cooking, they would extract the math, the science, the agriculture, the geography, the history from the recipes, from the whole rich environment of cooking, and segregate that, separate it, dissect that idea, and put the parts that were math in a math book and the parts that were science in a science book. So they dissected every single thing in life into textbooks. And so think about that. We are accustomed to textbooks. One of the first things that homeschoolers do is invest in curriculum. They got math, reading, science, geography, all those things. And you go out and you spend a lot of money on curriculum only to find that replicating school at home doesn't really work. Now, it may take 1 or 2 years to find that out, but eventually people do. So first we have the dissection of ideas into subjects. Why? Well, because then we control exactly what is being dripped out to the younger people, and that they're all in the same bucket, so to speak. Now, at that time, we had lots of scientists 150 years ago doing amazing things. We had Pavlov's dogs experiments. You remember the bell and the salivating? Yeah. Well, why do you think we have bells in between classes? That's exactly where they got that idea from. The people in Prussia who designed this system that we got through it coming to the United States. Hermann Ebbinghaus was one of the originators. Horace Mann in the United States got that whole idea from Prussia. And then in that book, The School Promoters by Alison Prentice, you will see the correspondence and the connection between Horace Mann and Egerton Ryerson. And they spoke, they connected, it came to Canada. So that's how we got this system of tax-funded education that is exactly the same as the United States. There's the fundamental processes are the same. So the second thing is the bells. So first we have ideas and concepts being dissected into subjects. Then we have bells in between classes. What do those bells teach our children? If you're in a classroom and you're doing something, maybe you're really super excited about it. Maybe you really love it, and the bell goes off. What do you learn? You learn that you have to stop thinking about it, no matter how interesting it is, no matter how important it might be, no matter how much you really are intrigued by it, but that it really doesn't matter, because once that bell goes off, you have to forget about it. You have to put it aside. You have to compartmentalize it and go to the next cell to learn the next bunch of information. So basically, you're taught to stop thinking when the bell goes, and that the things you were thinking about were irrelevant, because not in any time of your conventional school, industrial school life are you going to be able to deep dive into the things that are truly relevant and important to you. So this is where the transition, again, if you think about those two things, those make it very difficult to transition to free learning, really loving what you learn. The third thing they did was they instituted the grade levels and age, basically children grouped by date of manufacture. So all the kids that were this age went in together to learn this stuff. And so if you're a 10-year-old in a group of 10-year-olds, what do you learn? You learn how to be a 10-year-old. You see, before we had that, ages mixed freely. We had one-room schoolhouses where the community would decide what the kids would be doing, what they would have access to, and the teacher was trusted with what each different child could do. They wouldn't all be forced to do the same thing at the same level. They would be age mixing and seeing older kids doing things that they didn't know yet. They didn't learn that yet. So maybe if they saw somebody else doing it, much like an infant learning how to walk or talk, they would hear somebody else, see somebody else doing something, and want to try to do it. They don't have that opportunity in even 2 or 3 grade levels or a mixed, a 4-5 split kind of thing, because inevitably everybody ends up working at the lowest common denominator because it's easier for the system to regulate and get standardized information from. So, and that's the word, everything was standard. Kids who wanted to read above their grade level in schools are very often put off and told, oh no, that's not in your grade level. You can't take that out of the library. So after 4 to 6 generations of this kind of conditioning, and it is classical conditioning, it's like spoon feeding. It's like cookie cutter system. So if you've been spoon-fed your entire life, how are you going to know how to feed yourself? If you're a parent, which I can pretty much guarantee that anybody watching this would probably be a parent, and you have children, you know the process of going from this to knives and forks and other or chopsticks or whatever. It's a process. And it takes time. It's like picking up a violin. You don't automatically become a virtuoso. It takes time. It takes awkwardness. Because awkwardness is the place in which we learn. Awkwardness is the place in which we adapt to new things. When we are uncomfortable with something, that's the time that we're becoming aware of it and we're becoming comfortable with it. But we've become so comfortable with this classical conditioning that when we take our kids out of school, we are still thinking, oh, how do I know they're at the right grade level? Am I doing my child a disservice? Do I need report cards? So that de-schooling process is something you don't want to take lightly. A lot of times, the easiest thing for me to say to parents is you become an anthropologist, and your child is your subject animal. And that's not to be disrespectful to anybody, but it's anthropology. We learn from observing. So if our children are playing in their natural environment, we can learn a lot from that by observing. It's hard because sometimes we're all too busy. And then we rely on other people. We ask other people to say, I need to see a report card for my child because I don't know what they're learning. Report cards and standardized tests are only of any value whatsoever to somebody who doesn't have a relationship with the person being tested or the person that the report is about. If you have a one-to-one relationship with your child and things are really stressful and anxious, if you're worried about what they're doing, if you hear yourself saying all they do is this, think about that. That's your perception of what they're doing. So in deschooling, in deprogramming, first, it's like you've been on a bunch of pills. You need to get off of all of them and see which ones you really need. Okay? That's an example. So, a process that you can find in many, many wonderful books, like the Teenage Liberation Handbook, Ivan Illich's Deschooling Society, Deschooling Our Lives by Matt Hearn. I will put all of these books and links to them in the comments afterwards. So these books help us because this is not a new process. When our children come out of the system, don't try to replicate the system at home. Let your children play, regardless of their age. Teenagers, wait till they come and ask you, what do I do? Give them the gift of boredom. Let them, for the first time in their lives, probably, figure out what they want to do and not just be told by somebody else what they're to do, when they're to do it, and how they're to do it. You don't have to have them sit where they're told, do what they're told when they're told. That is the epitome of this wonderful quote. We were taught to be taught, so we learned to be led. Now, do we want our children to be the followers, the people who are being led, or do we want our children to be the leaders? Do we want our children to be the people that are going to make the changes that we need to make in this planet to survive? How are they going to learn nanotechnology? How are they going to learn what kind of food the people might need on Mars? How to build colonies on Mars? We can't even begin to think of the types of things that our kids will be faced with in the future. So being able to think creatively, if you haven't seen Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk, Do Schools Kill Creativity? It's fabulous. I'll put a link in the chat, in the comments. You need to. So deschooling is a process. It may take between 1 and 3 months for every year that a child has been in school. Now, you might have a child who absolutely loves academics, and that's great. No better or no worse than a child who learns from playing games. I've seen kids as young as 9 doing, college or university level arithmetic and concept playing Minecraft or Roblox. And most of the parents of these kids will just look at their kids and say, all they're doing is playing this game all day. Well, what would cause them to want to play this game all day? This game is providing them with stimuli and interesting things and challenges. Kids love challenges, but only on their own, in their own way. So if we're walking down a street and the snow is everywhere, but the pathway is clean, are our kids going to walk on the pathway, the easy way, the way that is clear? No. They're going to be stomping through the big piles of snow because it's more difficult, because it's more challenging. Kids don't like challenges if they're given them when they're not interested in it, when it's compulsory and not of their own volition. So as parents going through a deschooling process, when we are observing what they do and interacting with them, what do you like about this? What is it that, what do you have to do to get to the next level? What's the challenge? Most kids who have been diagnosed, and I'm not a doctor, gotta say, but through 30 years of observing kids and working with kids who have been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, if they are doing something that they love, they don't have any attention deficit at all. They can sit and do whatever it is they're fascinated with all the time. So, and for hours, hours and hours. And it's up to us to learn from them, what is the attraction? What is it that they're getting from this? So I've seen a young person who didn't do any math whatsoever now does a very complex statistical analysis, interest, investments, so much of what we would never put in a curriculum for a kid that was 9, maybe, that they're doing because it's relevant in a game that we haven't bothered to take the time to find out. Or maybe it's just not our thing. If you're not interested in the games that your kids are playing, don't think that those games aren't beneficial. Because we have games right now that you can get university credits in. So I know we're coming to an end here, and I have so much. I could talk about this forever. 5 things. If you are a new homeschooler, if you are finding that you are struggling with your child, remember, the deschooling process is mostly about our expectations. And we have to reassess those expectations. Where did we get the expectations? Like, who told us whatever it was? Where did that information come from? Why do we think there's going to be gaps? Why do we think our children may be behind? If we're not comparing them to other kids their own age, because they are different. There are 9-year-olds who go to university, seriously. So we should not compare our children just because of their date of manufacture. That's what the schools do. So looking at our kids' strengths, do they know more today than they did yesterday? And our relationship with our kids is something that needs to be fostered. Listening twice as much as we speak. Everybody's heard that one. So I really hope that this has helped. And yes, I can answer lots more questions, or I can point you in the directions. I will now go and put all these resources into the comments. Lena and everybody else out there, thank you for spending the half hour with me. And see you next week. And send in your comments, questions, and queries, because I'd be happy to bring them up. And if you want to be on the show, the link is in the description. Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful day.